Hi, my name is Tally Crowell, and this is my visit to the Columbus Art Museum. The first painting I'm going to be talking about is Rankin Square by Barbara G. Pound. Why did I choose this artwork? There's something about the muted tones and the quality of the lines that evokes a sense of quiet solitude. I felt an emotional connection to the artwork, and I wanted to spend more time observing it. Elements and Principles of Design Part 1. Lines. The lines are mostly actual, created by a charcoal medium. They are expressive and sketchy, defining the forms of the buildings and the cityscape. There are also implied lines created by the edges of the shapes and the direction of the strokes. Shape. The shapes are representational, representing the architectural forms of the buildings. Light. The light source is implied and appears to be coming from above, creating daylight. The artist uses shading and highlights by the charcoal to depict the play of light on the building. The light source is external to the image, and the light is also natural. Color. The artwork is monochromatic, using shades of black, gray, and brown. Hints of warm, orange-brown tone in some areas suggest light. The limited color palette creates a somber and atmospheric mood. Elements and Principles of Design Part 2. Texture. The charcoal medium creates a rough, textured surface. The artist uses different strokes and densities that create varied textures of the buildings in an urban environment. The textures are implied and created by the artist's technique. Space. The artist creates a strong sense of depth through the perspective and overlapping forms. The view and the receding lines of the buildings contribute to the illusion of space. Unity and variety. Unity is achieved through the consistent use of charcoal and the overall urban landscape of theme. Variety is created through the different shapes and sizes of the buildings, the varying textures, and the range of tones in the charcoal. Emphasis and focal point. The focal point is the central cluster of buildings, particularly the taller structures that stand out against the background. The artist emphasizes this area through the density of lines and contrast in tones. Elements and Principles of Design Part 3. Balance. The composition has an asymmetrical balance, with the buildings distributed unevenly across the picture plane. Proportion and scale. The proportion and scale are realistic, representing the buildings and urban environment. The perspective gives a sense of scale of the cityscape. Content and emotional response. The artwork captures a historical urban scene, focusing on the architectural forms and the atmosphere of the city. It evokes a sense of nostalgia and a quiet, contemplative mood. The second painting I'm going to be talking about is Blue Painting by Hilda Shapiro Thorpe. Why did I choose this artwork? I chose this artwork because it provides a tangible example of abstract expressionism. Elements and Principles of Design Part 1. Lines. The brushstroke create and implied lines that create movement and direction. There are no distinct drawn lines, but the edges of color fields and the direction of the stroke create a sense of line. Shape. The shapes are abstract and non-representational. Light. The light source is external to the painting, and the painting itself does not depict a specific light source. Color. The painting uses a range of colors including blues, purples, greens, black, and white. These colors are mostly secondary and tertiary. The blues and purples dominate the painting, which aligns with the title, Blue Painting. The colors evoke a sense of depth, emotion, and energy. Elements and Principles of Design, Part 2. Texture. The painting has a visible implied texture. The impasto technique creates a sense of depth and tactile quality. The texture adds to the expression of the painting. Space. The painting creates a shallow space by layering colors and brushstrokes. There is no illusion of deep perspective, but the overlapping shapes create depth. Unity and variety. The consistent application of paint and the overall color palette create a sense of unity. The dynamic composition and the range of hues prevent the painting from being monotonous. Emphasis and focal point. The focal point is somewhat ambiguous. However, my eyes were drawn to the darker and more densely painted areas in the center of the canvas. Elements and Principles of Design, Part 3. Balance. The painting has an asymmetrical balance. The distribution of colors and shapes is not symmetrical, but the composition feels balanced overall. The darker and heavier areas are balanced by the lighter areas. Proportion and scale. The painting is a medium-sized canvas. The proportions of the abstract shapes are not intended to represent anything specific, so they are not subject to traditional notions of proportion. Content and emotional response. The painting feels dynamic and expressive. It invokes a sense of energy and emotion, and emphasizes the art's spontaneous expression and the emotional impact of color and form. The third and last painting I'm going to be talking about is Veneer and Grapes by Helen Torr. Why did I choose this artwork? I chose this artwork because it presents a mix of representational and abstract elements. Elements and Principles of Design, Part 1. Lines. The lines in this artwork are both actual and implied. Actual lines are seen in the edges of the frame, the outlines of the veneer piece, and the grapes. Implied lines are created by the edges of the shadows and the patterns on the wallpaper. Shape. The shapes are a mix of organic, like the grapes, and geometric, the rectangular frame and the implied square of the wallpaper. Light. The light source is outside of the artwork, coming from the top right. It is evidenced by the shadows cast by the veneer piece and the grapes. Color. The colors are muted and earthy, with browns, grays, and a pale green. These are primarily secondary and tertiary colors. The color palette creates a calm and somewhat melancholic emotional response. Elements and Principles of Design, Part 2. Texture. There are implied textures, such as the rough texture of the veneer and the smooth texture of the grapes. The textures are somewhat true to the subject, but they are also stylized, contributing to the overall abstract quality of the work. Space. The placement of the grapes on the table, the veneer placed in the middle, and the wall in the background create a sense of depth. The shadows also add to the three-dimensional feel of the painting. Unity and variety. Unity is created through a consistent color palette and still life composition. Variety is created through the different shapes of the objects and the patterns on the wallpaper. Emphasis and focal point. The focal point is the veneer piece because of its central placement and unique shape. Elements and Principles of Design, Part 3. Balance. The balance is asymmetrical, with the veneer piece slightly off-center. The balance is created by the placement of the grapes and the darker color on the left side of the painting. Proportion and scale. The proportion and scale are distorted, particularly with the veneer piece. It's larger and more prominent than we might expect. This distortion adds to the surreal and abstract quality of the work. It is not content and emotional response. It is not showing the beauty of natural objects in a realistic way, but in a way that is stylized. It is more about the arrangements and shapes and color selections. My experience at the museum. I went in expecting to see a variety of artworks, but did not expect to be able to engage with them intellectually. Another surprise was how much time I spent with just a few pieces. I found myself drawn to certain artworks and wanting to absorb them. I was also surprised at how well I could evaluate the artwork using the elements and principles of design.